Hey there, I'm Kathy Brown, registered dietitian nutritionist and certified personal trainer, back to talk all three things nutrition and wellness for active women over 40. And today, specifically, I want to talk about gut health over 40. This is a topic I'm pretty passionate about because I do truly believe that the root of our long-term health and wellness and decreasing chronic illness, a lot of that falls into taking care of our gut. Our gut plays a huge role, influences a lot of those factors throughout our body. And let's be honest, when you have gut issues, it really can be pretty uncomfortable, painful, and even sometimes debilitating. And we tend to take it for granted until we start to have problems. It's very common to have gut health issues during peri and post-menopause. Any hormonal changes do impact a lot of different parts of your body, including your gut. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But I see women all the time experiencing gut issues for the first time in their 40s or 50s. And it's new to them. So they think there must be something specific that I'm eating or that has gone wrong in my body that I can fix to make this better. And so they jump to quick fixes to try and get rid of the issue. And having lived with gut issues for my entire life, I understand that temptation, but this is one area where you really need to have the foundation solid before you start trying to fix cracks in the walls. Because if you jump over the foundations, some of these quick fixes can actually do more harm than good. So we'll talk about the foundations in just a minute, but first I want to kind of get some definitions out of the way. Gut health. What do I mean by gut health? Well, traditionally, when we talk about the gut, we're talking about the large intestine, which is also known as the colon. Why are there so many names for one body part? I don't know. It can be confusing, but really, honestly, gut, colon. And I do see some gastrointestinal professionals sometimes use gut as an all-encompassing term to include the entire GI tract, gastrointestinal tract, from the mouth all the way to the rectum. For the purposes of what we're talking about today, though, we're going to talk about that large intestine because you have microbes that are living in that large intestine mostly. There can be some in other parts of the GI tract, but if you get too many outside that colon, you have other problems, and that's outside the scope of today's video. But those microbes include everything from bacteria to yeast to fungi or fungi, however you pronounce it, to archaea and viruses. And this is a good thing. They belong there. They play a role in the harmony of the gut environment, but bacteria specifically influence our overall health. And the microbes that live in your gut are referred to as the microbiota. And when there are more bad microbes than good microbes, that's when you start to have these gut health issues. Now, another term you may have seen is microbiome, and this is referring to the entire environment of the gut, to include the microbes themselves, but also the integrity and health of the gut lining, the pH, other compounds that may be present in the gut, and how all of these things, elements, interplay together and with the rest of the body. So here is an unfortunate fact, but I don't want you to take this as whoa, this is a problem, this is terrible, one more thing I have to deal with, because this is something that you do have some control over. But during peri and post-menopause, our gut changes. That you don't have control over. It is going to change because those reproductive hormones are changing. And we have receptors for estrogen and progesterone throughout the gut. And FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, those increase while estrogen and progesterone decrease. And so that all plays a role in changing your gut. Now, microbial diversity is one of the things that they've observed decreases. Diversity of the different types of microbes that you have in your gut is desirable and even necessary to ensure that your body has resilience to environmental stressors. Your gut plays a huge role in that. At the same time, many women tend to experience increased levels of GI symptoms, very much related to the fact that these receptors are looking for estrogen and progesterone, and it's declining. But the GI symptoms that are very common include abdominal pain, bloating, nausea, constipation, indigestion, and even sometimes diarrhea. And this occurs quite frequently during and even after the menopausal transition. Now, there is an interplay between the microbes and the hormones as well, specifically estrogen. So it's not just the fact that you have these receptors in the gut that are looking for these hormones that are declining, but also certain gut bacteria help to metabolize estrogen and either shuttle it out of the body, which is good. Sometimes you need to get the estrogen out of your body that has been used, or some of the other microbes can recycle it back into the system as needed. And evidence suggests also that estrogen and progesterone improve barrier function of the intestinal cells. So basically, there are these little, they call them tight junctions, but they're little gaps in between the cells in the lining of the intestines, and they move in and out regularly. And the estrogen and progesterone, they upregulate, meaning they increase the proteins that hold those tight junctions together. And so when you have declines in, or decline, how do I say that word? I think I say it differently every time I say it, but when those hormones decline, then the gut barrier integrity decreases because you don't have as many of those proteins holding those tight junctions together. So then you end up having microbes that get out of the gut, which can be an issue for immunity for other parts of the body. But then you also have compounds that are able to get into the gut that typically wouldn't be there. You know, it does impact the integrity of that intestinal barrier when you have these declining hormones or when the hormones are gone. And so there are things that we can do to improve that, though. So inflammation can be a result of that gut barrier integrity declining with the changing hormones. Now, one of the major, well, the major role of the bacteria in the gut is that they break down compounds from the foods that we eat. They use the process of fermentation to break down those foods, a lot of which are foods that either slipped through the GI tract unabsorbed, undigested, or sometimes it's things that our body is not able to break down, such as fiber. So when these bacteria ferment these food compounds, then the byproducts of that fermentation are referred to as metabolites. And they include things such as short chain fatty acids, which you may have heard of, or SCFAs. They produce, some of the metabolites are sources of energy for themselves. They'll break down the foods that we eat and produce sources of energy for them to continue doing their jobs. And then there are signaling molecules that they produce that influence metabolism and immune function. Now, remember, your gut is a major hub for your immune system. Studies suggest that specific species of bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids are depleted in postmenopausal women. And these short-chain fatty acids are the compounds produced by certain gut bacteria as a byproduct of the fermentation of dietary fiber. Okay? So short-chain fatty acids are good. And during peri and postmenopause, the production of short-chain fatty acids decreases because we have less of those bacteria. And the short-chain fatty acids are beneficial, and they include things like butyrate, which you may have heard of, acetate, and propionate. Short-chain fatty acids support metabolism. They support lipid and glucose regulation. They regulate inflammation and immune function and overall colon health. It should also be noted that visceral fat, which is one of the most common complaints of peri and postmenopausal women, is inversely correlated with the amount of bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids. Meaning, the more of these beneficial bacteria that specifically produce short-chain fatty acids, the more of those bacteria you have, the less visceral fat, abdominal fat, you are likely to have. There's also, unfortunately, studies that suggest that postmenopausal women have higher levels of bacterial species that are detrimental to bone density. And they've done a lot of studies. These are mostly just observational, and you can't say across the board this is every woman in peri and postmenopause. So they're really kind of just looking at large groups and saying, okay, this is the trend, but it's not necessarily everybody. But these differences in the gut microbiota between pre and postmenopausal women are more pronounced. They tend to be more pronounced in women who have more of the menopausal symptoms like hot flashes, mood issues like anxiety, stress, depression, menstrual irregularities, cardiovascular symptoms, or changes to the skin and body. So I think what this is telling us really is the symptoms, the number and severity of the stereotypical menopausal symptoms could be an indicator that there's something going on in our gut even before we start to notice issues with our gut. And so it's really never too early to start focusing on the foundations for your gut. So again, not all is lost. You have a lot of control over this. Improving gut health is a powerful way for you to feel better and to improve your wellness for the long term. A good gut will live, like as long as you keep up those foundations, then a good gut can take you well into old age, 100 years plus. So, and you do have some control. You have all the control over your diet. Is diet always going to fix gut health issues? Not necessarily, but in most cases, it makes a huge difference. So, ways to improve gut health through lifestyle. These are what I refer to as the foundational pillars. And I say lifestyle now because it's not all diet. But we are going to start with good nutrition. So things that you want to eat consistently, high fiber foods. So in episode 12, I talked all about the importance of fiber in the diet. And that was as it relates to cardiovascular disease, which, by the way, your gut has an impact on cardiovascular disease as well. All fiber is important for overall health, but specifically fiber that is considered prebiotic is what the short chain fatty acid producing bacteria use for fuel. Prebiotic fibers are going to include beta glucan, which we can find in whole grains like oats. We can find it in mushrooms and in seaweed. Inulin is a prebiotic, and this is found in things like asparagus, onions, and leeks. Pectin, this is high in apples, avocados. Fructooligosaccharides, those are found in bananas, garlic, asparagus, and many other fruits and vegetables. There's galacto-oligosaccharides, which we find in beans and lentils. And then resistant starch. And resistant starch is getting its day in the sun these days. But a lot of fruits and vegetables already have resistant starch, including bananas and potatoes. But what we're seeing a lot of these days in social media is resistant starch can be increased by cooking starchy foods like potatoes and rice and then chilling it. And when you chill it, a lot of those starches bind together, they crystallize in a way that our body can't break down. And so then it goes through your system much like fiber to the gut and fuels those bacteria rather than breaking down into sugars in your small intestine and getting absorbed into the bloodstream as sugar. So resistant starch is where you cook a starch, chill it, and some of those starches crystallize so your body can't break it down into sugar. We don't have a number, like we can't quantify how much of the starch becomes resistant starch, but that is a great way for getting a little bit extra, quote unquote, fiber, fuel for those bacteria. All right. Other foods that you want to eat consistently, fermented foods like yogurt, kimchi, kombucha, sauerkraut, apple cider vinegar. Polyphenols from foods like berries, dark chocolate, green tea, olive oil, nuts and seeds, soy. Like these are all great sources of polyphenols, and those polyphenols help to fuel our good bacteria. Lean proteins. Now, specifically, fiber, fruits, and vegetables are going to fuel those beneficial bacteria, but I throw lean proteins in there because there are studies that indicate that diets high in saturated fat, specifically from animal sources, can decrease the diversity of your microbiota. We want that diversity. So if you have a diet high in fatty animal proteins, then you could be decreasing the diversity of those gut microbiota. And high saturated fat diets also tend to increase inflammation and impair gut integrity, according to some studies. Foods that we want to, let's go back. Lean proteins. So what are going to be your lean proteins? I mean, there are some lean animal sources, which would include like boneless, skinless chicken, turkey, fish. But you want to limit those high fat animal proteins. And then you have the plant-based proteins like beans and nuts and seeds and soy. And whole grains have a little bit of protein as well. So getting a good variety of different sources of protein is always a great idea. Foods to limit. Okay. Now, this is not to demonize any one food. Specifically, one of the foods on this list is sugar. There is a need for sugar. There is a time and a place for sugar, but diets really high in sugar tend to foster those bacteria that are detrimental to your health and can lead to dysbiosis. Like we just talked about, diets high in saturated fats from animal sources can lead to decrease in diversity and increase inflammation and impaired gut integrity. Highly processed foods. And when I talk about highly processed foods, I'm not talking about canned beans or packaged bread. Well, some packaged bread, but if you're getting a good quality packaged bread, that's not highly processed. I'm talking things like sausage, bologna, hot dogs, packaged pastries and cookies like Oreos, Doritos, Cheetos, the things we consider junk food. These things are highly processed and do not do great things for your gut integrity. All right, so we talked about diet. It really doesn't have to be too difficult. Eat a lot of good, healthy fiber. Eat your fruits and vegetables. Eat your whole grains. Eat your nuts and seeds and beans. And limit sugar, high fatty foods, and processed foods. It's as simple as that. All right, next up, move your body, okay? Stay consistently active. And when I say consistent, I don't mean once a week or, you go hard for 5 days and then you're off for 2 weeks. Like, you've got to be consistent. Your body has to be able to adapt to what you're doing. Excuse me, I'm going to pause for a second because I need to grab some water. All right, sorry, just had to grab a little bit of water. I think we're all good now. But move your body, stay consistently active. There's lots of good research that suggests that people who are more consistently physically active have more diversity of the gut microbiota than those who are not as active. And I know from experience that when you're feeling bloated and you're feeling pain in the abdomen, that it seems counterintuitive to go exercise, like it would make it worse. But trust me when I say yes, at first it may be uncomfortable, but it helps. I've lived with IBS my whole life. I have more regular bowel movements, less abdominal pain, and significantly less bloating when I am regularly moving my body. All right, next up, manage stress. If you've ever had butterflies, then you know that the stress of being nervous about something, that directly causes issues with your belly, right? With your gut. So there is a bidirectional influence of the brain on gut health and then vice versa. And actually recent studies suggest that there's more communication going up from the gut to the brain than there is from the brain to the gut, which suggests that this is a huge area for brain health and mental health. But that being said, when you're stressed, obviously one of the first places you're going to feel it is in your gut. And likewise, when your gut is unhealthy, it's very well documented that you feel stress more acutely and that anxiety and depression increase. Obviously, there are some things that you can't control in life. You're going to have stress occasionally. So it's really important to have those tools in your tool belt that work for you to help alleviate stress in the moment and to actively manage stress. And when I say actively manage stress, that means delegate what you can, eliminate those things that are not serving you in your life that you're able to eliminate. Obviously, I understand there are certain things that you just can't get rid of, but and really work on how you react to stress. Because, as someone who gets behind the wheel of the car for an hour to an hour and a half each way to work every day, I sometimes overreact to stressful situations in traffic and start screaming at the other cars. Whereas if I just take a few deep breaths, then it makes me feel better. It makes the rest of the drive much more tolerable, and quite honestly, it decreases the danger level of being in the car next to me. All right. And then lastly, not least, but lastly, sleep. And I know that this is a struggle for most women in peri and post-menopause, is getting enough sleep. But lack of sleep is perceived by your body as stress. And if you're struggling with sleep and you've got your sleep hygiene in a really good place, like you've got a nice, dark, comfortable room, you're turning off all of the screens 30 minutes before you lay down for bed, you've got your routine in place, and you're still not able to sleep, then talk to your doctor. But that sleep is so important because you go through all of these hormonal cycles while you're asleep that help your body repair and recover from the day before, get you ready for the next day. And part of what happens while you're sleeping is that rest and digest, where your digestive system really kind of cleanses itself. And so it's so important for us. Okay, so going back to what I said at the beginning, you really should start with the foundations before you start trying quick fixes, okay? What this means for your gut, before you jump to supplements, I'm hungry, it's time to eat. Before you jump to supplements or elimination diets, make sure your diet, exercise, sleep, and stress are all in a good place for your gut to thrive. And then, if you're still having issues, you can work with a dietitian who can help you pinpoint specific areas of concern, guide you through what kind of testing you may need to get, and help you make a plan to repair your gut. And the dietitian can also help guide you if maybe there's something more than nutrition going on here. Maybe there's something mechanical that you may need to look into with a GI doctor. So definitely get that foundation in place. Don't jump to the quick fixes, doing cleansing detoxes. Your body generally doesn't need that. It just needs tender, loving care. And remember, I didn't mention this earlier, but part of good nutrition is getting sufficient fuel for your body. If you're not fueling enough, then that GI tract isn't getting the energy that it needs to work properly. And if your intestines are empty, there's nothing to move along. And that can cause things to sit in your gut for long periods of time and produce gas. And so make sure you're fueling sufficiently as well. Okay, I've rambled on long enough, but let's just not suffer in silence here, ladies.